And we're live on the YouTube. It's Thursday, 25th of March. It's approximately 9:30 in the evening. And if you're not watching the TV, you're watching Broadsheet on the telly. Very welcome back. It's good to be back with you tonight. We have a little bit of a smaller panel tonight, where our good friend Jamie is off writing his next Grammy to be nominated, possibly winning Grammy, not Granny, album tonight. But joining me as usual in the left-hand corner, the Countess of Crumlin, the Duchess of Dublin 12, Vanessa Foran. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, hello. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
You've given yourself the honorary doctorate without
I have.
even waiting to be.
The man there that does the blessings is there, so I might as well get something out of Trinity.
I am infallible. I want to make that clear before we start. All right.
Well, yeah, but you see, getting a Trinity degree, I'd be able to say then I got a Trinity degree, folks.
Vanessa thinks she's going to get the honorary doctorate live here on the air. So that's really what this is all about. And of course, the voice you're hearing is Professor Luke O'Neill, Professor of Biochemistry in the School of Biochemistry and Immunology in Trinity College. Luke, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks very much, Neil. Happy to be here.
Good to have you. And you've set the scene. I'm assuming that's your office that you're sitting in there.
I'm in my office.
Yeah.
And that's
you're
my
in
lab,
your office, especially for us.
Just out the door there. See that? That's my lab. There's 3 people working as we speak because science never sleeps is the great line, So no, we're very busy. We have 5 COVID-19 research projects running at the moment, so that's quite important, So I try and communicate occasionally. I get in the way out there, though. I probably break things. I should stay at home more often, I think,
So look, you've been kind of one of the, I guess, main independent voices, for COVID throughout the pandemic, and it's been interesting following a lot of what you're saying. But I kind of just to start us off, and we want to try and stay out of the doom and gloom tonight if we can. But how are we doing? How is Ireland currently doing, in your opinion, or from your perspective, in terms of where we were in March, where we are now, bearing in mind we're in this extended lockdown, which I think has driven everyone to its ends. But how is your view of the land at the moment?
Well, if you're a scientist like me, Neil, it's a numbers game. So look at the numbers. It's become a kind of a truism. Follow the data is the great phrase, right? So we haven't done that bad, We're number 4 in Europe for keeping our people alive. To give an example, so the number of deaths we have is a lot lower than other places. The UK has done the worst in the world per capita for number of deaths. So we're about number 4. Finland, I think, is ahead of us. Cyprus, 1 or 2 countries. The vaccine rollout, we're about number 4 in the EU. Again, that's not bad. We'd love to be number 1. We'd love to be like Israel or the UK have done tremendously well with the vaccine. So there are 2 metrics that say we're doing reasonably well, Now, of course, the other things that you would consider would be, has the lockdown done a lot of harm to our people? We've got one of the most stringent lockdowns in Europe, Time will tell. I'm hoping it will all be fine in a sense, that we will have protected our people. My dream, Nate, is in a year from now, we'll look back and be proud of ourselves that we managed to keep our people alive and stop people getting really sick from COVID, and we beat it with the vaccination campaign. That's the dream. But it's still very much in flux, let's put it that way, we won't know if lockdown was more harmful than we would like, for instance, until all the numbers are sorted towards the end, But at the moment, I think we haven't done too badly.
And with that, because we're seeing the cases go up, starting to creep up, and I know we're only starting to see that, so it is early days as to whether it's an anomaly or whether it is a trend. But with that in mind, there's a lot of people who might say the lockdown is reaches a point where it becomes less effective, that it's a short-term measure. Yep. Is that a risk that if we continue a lockdown until April, May, June, that we're inevitably going to see an increase in cases, which would scoop any possibility of lifting restrictions? And how does that look then? Is there a point that we missed, perhaps? And I don't want to put words in your mouth with the question, but is there a point where we should have lifted or relaxed restrictions up to now and allowed kind of, I guess, society to return to some level of normality, with a view that perhaps a lockdown was needed down the road?
Yes, it's a tricky question again because of the unknowns now, but I'll have a go at it. So we're clearly frightened from what happened at Christmas. Let's start with that. So we had the biggest spike in the world, remember. That was the most rapid increase in cases of any country in the world, right? And that translated into people dying, without doubt. That led to deaths and hospitalizations. But then luckily, we did fantastically, maybe the quickest drop in the world. If you see the graph, it's amazing. It's like literally a spike up and down, So, but that's in our memory now. We remember that the tragedy of December, where people may have died needlessly, you see. So then we're in a situation where we don't want that again, do we? and then there's unknowns here. And if they make a decision that increases the risk of that, they'll be hammered and that'll be bad, So it's a very difficult thing to figure out, I think. What I would say is this: the reason for the plateauing is people not complying with the guidelines. And that is simply because people are fed up to the back teeth of this. And we know in previous pandemics, a thing called pandemic fatigue sets in. And one of the symptoms of fatigue is you do whatever you like because you get sick of it, and you start mixing and mingling. In our case, people are in houses. Half the cases are people mixing in houses. And I'm not blaming people. People are desperately unhappy with the situation and they want to get out of it, don't they? It's a human instinctive response. So there's no doubt they've got to start releasing it. Because paradoxically, the restrictions actually encourage spread because people stop complying because of pandemic fatigue, And the best example, you see, we got to use science. I know, as you know, I'm a scientist, you got to use data. So the HIV pandemic, which you may remember, that was a massive crisis. They figured out pretty quickly it was a blood-borne disease that was spread through blood exchange. It wasn't spread through an aerosol like COVID is. And that meant certain things increased risk of spread. And of course, they said abstinence from sexual activity was recommended in the US, for instance. They tried that for a month and people said, to hell with this. I'm not going to live my life like that. So they moved from restrictions into what's called harm reduction. And they said, wear a condom, practice safe sex. And that began to work. That slowed down the spread of the virus, So I think with COVID, we have to move from, I think, let's put it this way, safe sex to AIDS will be safe indoor activities to COVID, because we know it's an aerosol-driven disease. Now, what that will mean is we'll have to let people out beyond the 5K for definite. It'll be a slow, stepwise process. We're not going to open the pubs. That would be a disaster because we know it spreads like wildfire in the pub. So in other words, you base your decisions on what we know about this virus. And we know golf is a safe thing. Tennis is safe. Gyms are pretty safe if they're outdoors, especially, and well ventilated are safe. We know outdoor dining is safe. So they've got to move back towards those things based on the science. And one of my biggest gripes at the moment is NPHET are not following the science. And the mess over the vaccine polls, to me, was an example. They weren't following the numbers. You didn't need to be a mathematician to figure that one out. 5 million people, or 5 people getting clots out of 1 million versus 1,000 dying out of 1 million. Which would you go for? So in other words, this narrative at the moment, we're in the middle of this. And NPHET, in my opinion, have to now start responding. And they know this. They're not stupid, Neil, by the way. They're clever people, you see. So I'm very interested now on the 5th of April, what they're going to do there. If they maintain the lockdown, that will be a disaster because people will just not comply and people start voting with their feet. And in previous pandemics, that's happened. We have evidence from previous pandemics that's what happened. And we have evidence in our own pandemic. The numbers have plateaued because of a lack of compliance. It's as simple as that.
So, I mean, when come April 5th and decisions are made, so if we have a case that things are relaxed, let's say, outdoor sport and that, and I know we're not going to see any dining or gyms or that being opened, but I suppose we would expect that cases will increase even more. Would that be fair to say? Because of that element of relaxation, people might be more comfortable socializing outdoors. What then, hypothetically, would you expect to happen in that case? I guess from the science perspective, and then maybe, if you want to preempt what NPHET or the government might recommend. So if we have a period where cases increase more so than they're increasing now, do we head back to a lockdown or do we ride it out and hope the vaccines catch up? What do you think would be the best?
Where do you think we can go? There's a real risk of another spike, obviously enough, because we know the way the virus works. So if we loosen too much and we let people mix and mingle too much, even though we all want to do that, and remember the 3 C's, never forget them. The highest risk by far is closed spaces, which means indoors, close contact between people, you see in crowds. If those 3 happen together, that's when you see a super spreading event, for definite, you see. And we know thousands of examples of that now. We know enough about how this virus spreads. So we've got to avoid that at all costs. And then we think about then what can we do, to prevent a spike happening. And as I say, a certain amount of outdoor activity will be a low risk. There's always be risks with everything, but it will be a low risk thing to do. Now, the reason why we got to go very slowly is because we've got to get the vaccine into as many arms as we can, because we know that will prevent spikes and outbreaks from what we're seeing in Israel, you see. So if we start at the end game, and if the end game is 70% vaccinated, we're then out of this pandemic, by the way, because you don't care about cases then, because the ones catching it won't be in those vulnerable groups, which means they won't develop severe disease, and eventually we'll stop counting cases. They'll be irrelevant, you see. At the moment, we can't do that because we know cases are in people who could well end up being very sick, you see. So that's why the case numbers are still important for the moment. I heard Leo Varadkar say yesterday, there's 35 hospitalizations per 1,000 at the moment, right? That will overwhelm any health system. If we get 5,000 cases, that overwhelms the health system. You know? And the reason is because there's vulnerable people in those 1,000 who will progress into severe disease. If those 1,000 people are in their 20s, you have nothing to worry about. 0.01% progress into severe disease if you're in your 20s, you see. So that hence the need for, you know, nuance and careful awareness of these scientific facts to help us.
And just on that, because this comes up a lot, I often see on social media people say the first figure we should hear in those press conferences or the headline in the paper is the number of vaccinated the previous day. So is it a point that when we hit that 70-80%, the government should just stop telling us in those press conferences what the cases are and just focus on vaccines? Or do you think we should really be sharing that more transparently? Because I know now there's always delay in the data going to Europe or to the ECDC. You know, so where is that sweet spot?
You stick it on the website, it's available. You don't hide it. The numbers should be available easily, but not on the main evening news every night in the week. We don't count the number of people having heart attacks or dying of lung cancer, do we? You know. So once it becomes, the reason why they're reporting them now is to keep people aware of it, you see. But of course, people stop listening. In fact, those case numbers now, nobody listens. Some do, some get very anxious, and that's understandable, of course, but the vast majority turn off now. And that's an example of pandemic fatigue. You know, those measures don't work anymore, you know, and there's no point in doing them. Try something else. And the vaccination numbers are really good to show because that gives people a sense of hope. One reason for pandemic fatigue, as you do, is trust in the authority, remember, as well, you know, and then you start saying to hell with this. So hence the vaccination numbers are really good because they're showing people something's happening here that's going to be useful to us, you know. But ultimately, the case number thing will stop being reported, at least on the main evening news. You'll still report them, as I say, on websites and so on. So it should be fine.
One of the things as well you mentioned was about how we're doing vaccine-wise, and we seem to be in the top tier in terms of where we are in our rollout, notwithstanding the fact there are supply issues. And certainly, you know, from the Minister of Health over the past couple of months, he's emphasized and tables have been shown where we're in the top two. But when I look at, you know, other international news reporting the European League table, I think it depends on how you take the data. But just kind of to help demystify, because you see a lot of frustration online when people talk about vaccines, the lack of them, when we hear about friends and family and loved ones in UK and US, and they're much younger than the rest of us getting their vaccines. You know, how is it fair to say Ireland is making good progress against the supplies that we're getting? Do you think Ireland should be making side deals with the likes of the Sputnik that's coming from Russia, which hasn't been approved, I know, by the EMA? Should we be making side deals with the pharma companies? Because the government seems to not want to or be hesitant to do that and just align with policy, even though other countries are doing it. So is it fair to say that we're doing well against where we expect to be? Or
Well, it's a tricky enough one because we're in the EU, remember, and we're tied into the EU's supply, and then we get a divvy of that, you see. You have to start with that statement of fact. And then, of course, that's good because if we weren't in the EU, we'd have no vaccine here. Because the big drug companies would go for the bigger countries first, and we'd be well down the pecking order. So that was a good decision that the EU did that. You can't have a bun fight with 27 countries trying to get the AstraZeneca vaccine. We wouldn't win that fight. We would eventually, but the big countries would get there first. So that's a good thing that we're tied into the EU. And I've no doubt at all that as soon as the vaccine arrives in Ireland, it gets into arms quickly. There's no evidence there's a delay there, you see. And the second thing I would say is this: it's a temporary problem. We will have millions, I'm very confident, we'll have millions of doses by May, June time watch in this country because AstraZeneca will sort out its supply chain. They're getting better at that. It's been a disaster, but it's getting better. Johnson & Johnson, they're going to make 2 billion doses of that vaccine. They're one of the world's best vaccine companies. They've got factories all over the place. They'll supply that vaccine to Ireland. We'll get, I suspect, 2 million doses of Johnson & Johnson. Then we have CureVac and Novavax. They'll be approved in the next month. And then we got Sputnik V. That's about to be approved by the EMA. They're looking at that very closely, and it's a really good vaccine, you see. So in other words, this problem will go away. It's just a case of getting on with it and letting the vaccine arrive in the coming weeks. I've no doubt about that. Now, what we might have done different is we could have been a bit punchier and gone to the Russians and the Chinese. Because what the EU said was, you can't negotiate with companies we've done deals with. That was one of the preconditions of the overall plan, you see. And they hadn't done a deal with the Russians. So we could have maybe explored that as a possibility. Now, mind you, that didn't stop the Germans getting 30 million extra doses off Pfizer, having said that. They went around that. EU rule, you know. But if I was in charge, I would be knocking on the Russians' doors back in January, and I'd be knocking on the Sinovac, the Chinese vaccine, because they're very safe efficacious. Let's get 2 million doses of those. We mightn't have got it, I don't know, but it certainly would have shown what's the word, commitment, shall we say, or aware that the number one goal is to vaccinate as many people as possible and as quickly as we can. And even worse, Neil, in a sense, what's even more galling for me personally is Israel is the evidence the vaccine is spectacular. 85% drop in death rate, 90% drop in hospitalization because of the vaccine, you know? And they're fully open, Israel, by the way, now, almost fully open, you know? We could be like that, couldn't we? Now, having said that, given that we're in the EU and given the various constraints, we're probably doing all right, and I wouldn't be too hard on them. But certainly if we get to May time and we haven't seen a massive increase in vaccination in our people, that's a huge disaster for the government. And we got to really make it clear to them this is unacceptable in whatever way we can. You know?
Just on that, because, sorry, Vanessa, just one of the things that often people talk about the vaccine is that it doesn't prevent transmission. You know, you're still just at risk. Can you maybe squash any myths or kind of set the record straight for us? Because I know it's often how things are worded and, you know, it can be interpreted different ways. But ultimately, if there's five, and welcome Jimmy Smyth, Jimmy's just joined us. There's four of us here now. There's four of us here now in the room. So if two of us are vaccinated, does that mean that if the virus is present, that there's less risk of us passing it on to those who are unvaccinated, or is it irrelevant that we're vaccinated?
Well, we didn't know that initially because the trials, strange as it may seem, didn't look for that. The trials that were done initially were just to stop people getting sick, which is a good goal, let's face it, with a vaccine. You want to stop people getting infected, getting sick, and getting severe disease. They didn't look at whether you're still infectious. Now, we know with viruses that live in your airways, right? They can live in your nose or live in your lungs. It turns out the immune system doesn't care about the nose often, and the virus can grow there, you know, because it's no danger having a virus in your nose. Into your lungs, that might kill you. So the immune system really kicks in and protects your lungs. So the question was, will it still live? You're vaccinated now, which means the troops are in your lungs, right? But there's no troops in your nose. So the vaccine or the virus might still grow in your nose, which means you might transmit it. That was the unknown, you know. And with other viruses that affect the airways, that was seen before, that you can be vaccinated. You won't get sick, but you still might spread a bit. And that was the unknown, right? The good news is they're looking for this now more and more. AstraZeneca, 67% decrease in transmission was shown in a UK study recently. And in Israel, that Pfizer vaccine was talking 85% decreased transmission. Now, it's a work in progress, but the signs are good that these vaccines should stop transmission of this virus. And even if the worst came to the worst, Neil, there will be a bit of immunity in your nose, which means you might have. There's one study actually showing 4-fold less virus in the nose if you're vaccinated. That's a tiny dose, you know. So if you do infect someone, the person you're infecting will have a mild disease anyway because it's a tiny amount of virus, you know. So we're much more optimistic now about the transmission question. And if this turns out to be true, we get out of this nightmare much more quickly, because that means the virus can't spread anymore. You know, if we're all vaccinated, it doesn't spread, it dies off, you know. So we're hoping the transmission science I just gave you there will hold up, and I'd be optimistic that it will.
Just on that then, and sorry, Vanessa, I will pass to you in a second. The concept then of asymptomatic cases, because this is something I've never really been able to find out clearly. How big of an issue is asymptomatic cases? And if it is an issue, speaking as a layperson, is the risk of transmission lower in asymptomatic cases because, say, they're not sneezing and you know, coughing and that, or is asymptomatic as big a problem as we feared back, say, March 2020?
Well, funny if this is the vaccine. One question we had is, will the vaccine turn everybody into asymptomatic spreaders? In other words, they have a little bit of virus in their nose, they won't have many symptoms, and they're still spreading it. That's what an asymptomatic spreader is, by the way. It's someone who has a tiny bit of virus in their nose, and then they spread it to someone else. Now, this is the single most malicious aspect of this virus by far, because when this began, when I first came across this virus 12 months ago, last January, I read about it in the Science magazine, little paragraph, nothing to worry about here, it'll be like SARS. Now, why was that a good thing? SARS was only spread through symptoms, okay? So in other words, if you had SARS, you felt shit and you went home, you know? And that was the way to control it. You could lock everybody up who had SARS because they were symptomatic, and that was it. This one, for 3 or 4 days, and this was first shown at the end of February by a German scientist nobody believed, and she was maligned and attacked for this. You're walking around for 3 days with no symptoms and you're spreading this virus. Now, the virus loves that because it wants to spread, remember, you see. And that's why this was so hard to contain. We couldn't isolate it based on symptoms because there were people walking around with no symptoms of spreading the virus, right? Now, what's the number like that? It's probably, some studies are saying 40% of spread is asymptomatic. That seems a bit on the high side to me. Other studies are showing 10% of spread is asymptomatic, but that's still high. Remember, that means there are people walking around in December during Christmas spreading this virus and they don't even know they've got it, you know? And of course, the unlucky bit is you infect someone who's vulnerable and they die and you're alive. You know, that's what's happening with asymptomatic spread, you see. That's why that's such a serious discovery in many ways. And that's the single reason why we need global lockdown was asymptomatic spread, because you didn't know who was infected and who wasn't. Everybody had to stay home. You know, that's why global lockdown was introduced from that single fact to do with asymptomatic spread. So it's an important consideration. But remember, if we end up with everybody vulnerable being protected, right? And remember, all the vaccines give 100% protection against severe disease and death, 100% protection. We don't worry about symptoms anymore or about case numbers, as I said earlier. Vaccines aren't designed to stop you getting the sniffles, remember. They're designed to stop you getting really sick, and that's what these vaccines do. So the issue of asymptomatic spread becomes much less of a concern once you've got widespread vaccination.
Neil, do you mind if I hop in there? I'll start at the most recent thing you're talking about, the global lockdown.
Yeah.
But how could we really take our role in a global lockdown seriously when all our airports remained open and our ports of entry? 100%. And I say that because but just hear me out on this, because we've sort of travelled the whole lockdown since last April on the show, and I kind of have focused on the arrivals all the time, and whereas if it had to been foot and mouth, if it had to be in the hands of the Department of Agriculture, they would have shut down. They wouldn't have thought twice about going into the airports and shutting everything down. So I find this what you say of there being a global lockdown. There was still transport. It was still traveling around the world. If there had been a global lockdown, our situation, our cases would never have escalated beyond what landed here from Italy in February, and so I'm kind of not living. I'm not accepting that theory that it worked.
Well,
sorry, but there was just one before you go into that. Then about the lockdown here now looks like April. Honestly, I think they're going to keep us locked down till the Leaving Cert is over. But that's just my theory. The thing about the whole the people you're saying this time last year there wasn't a car on the road. We were level 5, nothing was happening. Now there's cars everywhere, right? I actually think the Irish government lost the support after Golfgate. I think Golfgate was the turning point. At that point, they kind of just felt, well, if they don't give a shit, we're not giving a shit. And you could time sort of the change of people's attitudes and sort of the rallies and the thing around that. And I think that was a turning point for the Irish in terms of how they thought of lockdown. But then the vaccine is a game changer. But I'm very cynical about the drive about sort of pushing Pfizer's from October. Leo was tweeting, isn't it great? Pfizer's are almost there. And I didn't like that messaging at all. But yeah, the vaccine is the game changer for everybody. Whether they want to take it or not, they're going to take it.
It's the only way out, Vanessa, the vaccine. And all these debates go away then. Travel, lockdown, all that disappears, all the bickering and back and forward, and you're making a mistake as the government, or you've got one opinion, I've got another. I don't like all that. I'm not a politician or an economist or an expert on travel, but I do know science gets us out through the vaccination campaign, because all those worries then go away, you see. And that's why I've always been optimistic, as I knew that was the way out ultimately. I thought that therapies would get there first in hospitals to stop people dying, because remember, this is a very serious disease that kills people. How are you supposed to react to it? Let people die or not? We know what the UK did was disastrous. We know Manaus in Brazil, the virus was let run free there, and that was a massively devastating thing. A huge number of people died in Manaus, and they're still dying there, by the way. So in other words, it's a tricky business, and governments stumble through it, and they make mistakes. And I agree with you. The travel thing, we had it almost down to zero in August. It came back in from Spain in September. That's how we got the second spike, was inward travel, you know. Now, don't ask me whether it was possible to lock the country in like New Zealand and the border and all that went back and forth forever, did it? Oh, we're in the EU. We've got a land border with the North. That was all part of the dialogue about travel, wasn't it? And now
that's true. But I remember very early on, back at the start of this, when you started being a feature on the telly, okay? And I remember you doing an interview there in your lab, and you were kind of, I'm going to sort of paraphrase now, but there's 170 labs working on this vaccination, so someone's going to get it right. So we're going to get this done, you know. And I might have kind of repeated it here on an earlier show, but I did find the sort of narrowing down of the three main names we're seeing here: Moderna, Pfizer's, and AstraZeneca here in Europe. But like, we knew the Sputnik was coming along as well, and we knew Johnson & Johnson's were working on the single shot. I just found the branding was a bit too. I actually do find the branding a bit too much, to be honest.
What would you have instead, Vanessa?
I don't know. I don't know. I like it. You buy an aspirin. You don't say you're getting the such and such brand of aspirin, or do you? You know,
you did when aspirin was invented first.
All right. Well, maybe so. Maybe I'm talking out of my hat. But I just remember the drive. It did become it very much became about the drive to get this into the market.
Yeah, well,
it was very much a corporate drive. Now, guys, I'm all about making money. I understand the corporate world. You know that I sit on boards. I know what it's about. I know how this happens. I know there's a commercial reality to all this. But like, there was hundreds of labs. You even said it yourself, working on this. Okay, some worked out, some didn't.
Vanessa, there was a race. Okay, there's about 160 vaccines in development as we speak. Pfizer got there first. Okay, they had the biggest ever clinical trial. They organized it. They got a load of investment in. They got there first. Moderna got there second. AstraZeneca got there. It's simply a race, you know, and someone wins the race. Now, there's a thing called first mover advantage, as you know, so that's part of the world as well. So I've no doubt by the time we get to June, July, August, there'll be 9 vaccines available in Ireland, whether we have a choice. And if you talk about pricing, I mean, AstraZeneca is about €1.50 a shot. Moderna is €23. Which would you rather go for, you know? And it's simply a case of which is available first, because it's an emergency. And remember, the economic destruction that this virus is causing is easily justified to spend $1 billion on the vaccine campaign, because that economic destruction goes away and we restore the economy, you know? That's why Israel paid a 1.5 premium for the Pfizer vaccine. That they were very clever. They got in early. They offered a big price because they knew they wanted to bring their country back as quick as they can economically, you know, but justify the price.
Can I put you on the spot, Luke? And I probably can guess what you'll answer, but this came up in conversation with family. If you were offered a vaccine tomorrow, forgetting about the price, and you had a choice, which one would Luke O'Neill? That was what we came up with in conversation, was which vaccine would you get? Oh, well, I get the one Luke O'Neill would get. Would you have a preference on which vaccine?
No,
does it matter?
Anyone, because they all give 100% protection, you see. So I would take any one of the 3 that's available in Ireland. If anything, AstraZeneca looks a bit more interesting because it gives a stronger response. People feel a bit rougher after AstraZeneca, right? That's become known now. People might have heard this is true, because that really gets the immune system going. That might mean it might give you 1, 2, 3 years protection, whereas the other ones might be shorter, you know. So if I was offered one of the 3, I might well go for that one. But in truth, I would take any at all. I'd even take Sputnik. I would take the Sinopharm vaccine from China, because I've seen the data. It's a really impressive vaccine. So any of the 5 that are in millions of people, I would take.
Good evening, Jimmy here. Hello.
Hey, Jimmy.
Hey.
Hi, Jimmy.
Vanessa, Neil, lovely to meet you, Luke.
Hi,
I'm sorry, I missed the early part, so you might have.
I revealed I was a Bogey Boys fan, Jimmy, so watch out.
Oh, Jesus, were you? Were you really?
I was. I'm sure I went to some of your gigs, actually.
Really? Oh, well, no. Well, we'll talk about that maybe later. But there's a couple of things. One, now you might have covered this, but today now the Brits have come out with, so they're 60% vaccinated, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe that, okay. So, but they've come out now with another 6 months of severe restrictions. Did you see this?
No, I didn't.
That's this evening. So they've decided that they're extend. So how do we square that with what Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael? Now, I'm not asking you to make a political statement here. They're talking about lifting restrictions at the beginning of lifting restrictions as soon as 5th of April or whatever. I think myself and Vanessa certainly, and Neil to some degree, we think this will go on through the summer to because of the seasonal thing, right?
Yeah.
So there's that. How do we square that? The other thing is the Bloomberg article today. I don't know if you've seen it.
No.
It's not a scientific article, and I'm not going to take you on science, obviously, Luke, right? So
feel free, Jimmy.
No. I know where my limitations are, but this double mutation thing, and the Bloomberg article is like pretty much a sociological treatise, and the person saying, look, with the way the big pharma are chasing after this virus, which is essentially what's kind of happening with mutations and stuff, and vaccines coming up, we're going to have to learn. This is going to be around. This is going to probably, the best we can hope for is that it'll become something like a cold at some point later on. This is what so we're looking at possibly years of this, decades,
Well, we are. It's another disease that's joined us. I mean, the flu. The first time someone got the flu was the year 1510. That was the time when that virus jumped from a waterfowl into a human. They reckon was the early 1500s. Before that, there was no flu. This 2019, a new virus jumps from a bat. We were familiar with the flu, aren't we? But it only began 500 years ago, and we still have the flu, don't we? So the history of infectious diseases is the only one we got rid of is smallpox. We eliminated that through vaccination. We've never managed to eliminate any other infectious disease. So now with polio, we've done great. There's a few pockets of polio left, whereas in the 1950s, it was an epidemic every so often. And again, vaccination got rid of polio. So this one will be around for a long time. It will become a manageable infectious disease like any other. That's what the future will be like with this. And the vaccine campaign will help us tremendously. Every winter, the vulnerable will be vaccinated against COVID-19, just like the flu. It'll be in the flu shot, I predict, because there's already 4 or 5 viruses in each flu shot each winter. You add another one in, bang, you protect them against COVID-19. So that's the likely vista.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we're locked down forever. It doesn't mean we've got all these horrible restrictions. It can't be like that, clearly. We may build buildings with more ventilation in the future. We may wear masks every winter, like the Asian people do. That's a sensible thing to do, you see. So that's what the future is more than likely going to be like. Remember as well, Jimmy, there will be natural immunity building up as well. The immune system is there to remember infections.
Well, that's a question I'm asking. I mean, with the UK, for instance, where is the herd immunity? Is it happening? I mean, after.
Yeah. Well, it will. So the very first time the second time I came across this virus, I was at a conference in America at the end of January, and I met a coronavirus world expert. And I said to him, what do you make of this then? He said, I don't have a look at it. It's changing now. It is going from human to human. That was the next big worry. Early January, it seemed to be animal to human, much easier to contain. Human to human, different ballgame entirely. He said, the only way out of this is to get 70% of the population either infected or vaccinated. That's the only way out, right? And that's the herd immunity concept in a sense. Now we will achieve that with the vaccination campaign that's running. That's the goal of it in many ways, And it's no harm if some people get infected naturally and they have natural immunity. That's okay. So I think the herd immunity will be reached with a combination of natural infection plus vaccines. And very importantly, we'll have protected the vulnerable with those vaccines. If we'd gone for herd immunity without vaccination, a lot of people would have died. That's the bottom line. And we know that from Manaus and from various places around the world. That's a proven scientific fact. That was questioned a lot back in May, June, and then the evidence became irrefutable. That would have been a consequence of that. And we know ourselves in Ireland. The deaths in January happened because we let it spread in December. That nobody can argue with those scientific facts, you see. So that's the situation. I'm struck what you said, Jimmy, about the UK. I mean, I thought there was a 4-step plan to come out of lockdown.
Yeah, and that's why it's a bit. Even though the Tories are in. There's internet fighting going on about it, but they've come out this evening and said that severe restrictions will be extended for six months. And
but I wonder what they mean by severe. I mean,
I don't have the data on that, so I was working right up now, so I just grabbed that before I came on here.
Well, now, if you look at Israel as a good comparison, right? So Israel are doing the right thing. Now we're lucky because we can follow them, and if they make a mess of it, we won't do what they did. Okay, so we're kind of blessed in that way, right? They're nearly fully open now, right? Because they've had 2 months of vaccination, they've got all their people vaccinated, Half of them have the second dose. They're bulletproof now, that population. And we can see the numbers in the hospitals. The numbers have plummeted there, you know. The number of deaths have plummeted. The number of severe disease because of vaccination. So in that situation, you can't possibly maintain a strict regimen if there's no reason to, you know, if there's no reason to. And the most important metric of all in this disease is number of deaths and number of severe cases and number of hospitalizations. Now, the other thing, there's two things to worry about outside that. One is long COVID. This is a serious disease in younger people that can persist for months and months and months. So the death rate isn't the only metric here. It's severe symptomology that can go on for months. And we know that's a real factor in this virus.
Yeah.
Other viruses do that. It's a well-known thing. Post-viral fatigue is well known. ME, it's known as. Viral infections cause these long symptoms, but it's much more prominent with this one. So we don't want these people getting infected because it might turn into long COVID, you see. Hence the need to vaccinate everybody, by the way, because that will limit the chances of long COVID. And then the last worry we have is the new variants. If new viruses will, you can effectively call them SARS-CoV-3, if you like, a brand new virus in the same family. What do we do now? Back to square one, we start vaccinating again. That's what we have to do. And that pushes the timelines out further, you know. Now, the good news there is the current vaccines do seem to work against the variants. They may not be as effective as they are against the old form, right? But there's evidence they will stop severe disease. They won't stop you getting a few symptoms. You may get sniffles. You may feel a bit rotten, but it won't progress into severe disease if you've been vaccinated with one of those new variants. That's the hope, you know. There's some evidence for that. We still don't know, though. And our next biggest fear is another variant that will definitely dodge the vaccine might emerge. And that will emerge if we don't vaccinate the developing world, because every time the virus copies itself, there's a risk of a variant. Hence, we got to get the vaccine all over the world. It's stupid, this vaccine nationalism. That's a completely ridiculous thing, because the only way we're all going to get out of it together is if we vaccinate everybody.
Yeah.
Well, that was interesting to hear you say, as a scientist, that you'd take any of them. You know, yeah. I mean, I've heard bad things about Sputnik, but you're hearing all kinds of misinformation, of course. And AstraZeneca is a bit of a worry for me, actually, because I have an issue with blood clots and stuff. Right. So I
can reassure you fully there, Jimmy. Reassure you fully. Anybody with a history of blood clots, this vaccine does not cause blood clots. That's the bottom line, right? And if it does cause it, it's extremely rare. It means these people have funny genetics and something else wrong with them, you know. And that's why the pause was a mistake, because the data told us that it had been in 20 million people. There were 37 cases of clotting. Now, you don't need to be a mathematician to look at the odds of getting a clot out of those numbers.
Oh, fair enough. But I mean, that's the stuff that'll be talked about. But I as I said, I missed the beginning of the show here. I'm sorry about that. But did you cover? I mean, my daughter's 23, and she went online the other day because she wants to go to America in June. And I'm saying, oh, geez, I have no idea, Ruby, what's the story there with the, testing, or you'll need a green passport or whatever the hell. So she checked online. She won't get a vaccination until 2023. I mean, have you covered now? Now this is a governmental issue, and I don't want to get you involved in politics, or, if you don't want to be. But how are they dealing with this? How do you feel it's bad?
That'd be a scandal, Jimmy. I mean, I've seen those predictive programs, all right, and you'd see these dates come up. But the Taoiseach is on record as saying he wants all. Well, in fact, let's start with the EU. They want all adults vaccinated. Remember, by the end of the summer. That's the stated goal from the EU. Everybody over 18, that is, by the way, should be vaccinated by the end of the summer. Ursula von der Leyen is on record as saying that. Our own Taoiseach said by the end of June he wants all the vulnerable groups vaccinated by then. That's about 700,000 people in Ireland, for instance. So
now with 6 people on Sunday getting their second, 6 people.
Oh, I know. Don't listen. You're talking to the most frustrated man in Ireland here. I want us to be like Israel, In fact, if I had a magic wand, I'd vaccinate the entire world now like that, So
yeah, but
is it money?
Jimmy, I think
is it availability? Is it money? Is it
no? I think with the predictions you're looking at now is the stock that they have to hand, or they have access to. But like you say, once Johnson & Johnson rolls out, as we said it here before, like that's capable of dropping 2 million doses into Ireland in a couple of months.
The other one that's great, Vanessa, is Sanofi. Now they're a very famous vaccine company. The funny thing is about the vaccines, AstraZeneca are like in the NZ League team in the vaccine world. They never make vaccines, So it's very strange that they were the ones that were contracted by Oxford. They were partly taken on because they agreed to give it away for free, interestingly. whereas Merck wanted money for that vaccine. You see, so Oxford had to go with AstraZeneca because Oxford University were on record as saying, we will give this away for free to the developing world, you see. And AstraZeneca said they would take that on. Adrian Hill, who's a good friend of mine, to disclose the conflict, he's part of the Oxford team. He had to go to the board of AstraZeneca to convince them to give it away for free. He said, you might make money in 3 or 4 years from variants, he said. Please give it away for free, right? This is all going on in the background with the vaccine business. Now, but Sanofi are your Man United of the vaccine world. That's a good analogy. But they're great. They've got the biggest number of factories. They make the flu vaccine for the world every year.
You mean they're the Cork? They're the Cork of the vaccine.
Exactly. They are the Cork. So they got their vaccine campaign underway, and guess what? Their vaccine failed in their tests. It wasn't good enough. And they had the wrong dose because they were being too cautious. Isn't that amazing? They're back up on the horse now. Their ego's been badly bruised. They will have 2 vaccines ready by the autumn. They can make 4 billion doses in a year, that company, because they've got so many factories, you know. So there's another example, you know.
Can I bring you back to sort of your own thing? And if you had got there in the end, if you'd got the, you know, created vaccine or managed to get something that got to testing, what is the capacity of an Irish facility to produce?
Well, no, we do make vaccines in Ireland. I mean, I think the Shingrix one is made, for instance, by GSK, right? So but it's not much. Most of the production in Ireland is not vaccines. That's the first thing, right? Now, we're very good in Ireland at making what are called biologics, biotherapeutics. We've got the biggest factories in the world, the Intel equivalent in Grange Castle. Pfizer have one. AbbVie have one in Sligo. They make antibodies for arthritis, this is what I work on directly, so I know a lot about that aspect, right? Now, to convert one of those factories into a vaccine plant would take about 6 months because you need different equipment. It's going to be validated by the EMA. They're very stringent, as you may know. The regulations are the most stringent around medicines and vaccines, much more stringent. The next most stringent industry is the airline industry because you can't have a plane kind of crashing. So in other words, really stringent. So it takes 6 months. Now, maybe in an emergency, they might do it in 3 or 4 months. But of course, what the companies are doing is they're shifting production of other drugs into Ireland to free up factory space, you see, to make the vaccine, you know. So in other words, they're all working really hard at getting this supply issue. I mean, can you believe it, Vanessa? In America, they're doing 3 million a day over there. And that's mainly Pfizer and Moderna, you know. So the factories in America are pumping out those vaccines to beat the band, you know. So I think they're doing their best actually to make as much vaccine. I
know it's a lot of it is like with Ruby there, Jimmy. It's sort of the supply they have access to at the moment, and that's what they're predicting. But I do think once these doses drop, you know, we'll all get sorted. But I wanted to ask you, I suppose 2 things, because one was this time last year, did you honestly think we would still be in full lockdown?
No, I thought by the autumn we'd be in a much better place because you see, we knew early on, Vanessa, that here's the example I would have been giving last April or May in my endless media appearances. And by the way, they ask me, I don't volunteer for that shit. They're always on to me. I get 4 requests a day from RTE to go on the news. Or honestly, I'm not joking. And I've got a day job, so I can't do it. But back then, I would have said the following. We know if everybody stayed at home for 3 weeks, this virus goes away, okay? Because it lives in your body, your immune system kills it, and you're fully, and then we use the word sterilized from this virus. And that's what the Chinese did. They locked everybody in their houses for 3 weeks, and it went away from China. And they had 0 cases after about a month because that's the way to get rid of it, you know? And I thought we'd be able to contain it through these measures. I thought people, now, you know, maybe it was a bit foolhardy because people get sick of it, as we've just been saying, and then the travel issue was a big one, as you correctly point out. So, you know, but I was hopeful that by the time we got to the autumn, we'd have it under control through public health measures. Where I went wrong was the testing was disastrous because that's the best way to beat the virus is to test the bloody people and lock them up if they're positive, and that was a aim. And then it got better now than it was then. You know, now again, I'm not being critical. These are hard things to set up. It's very difficult logistically. The Koreans could do it because they had SARS. Singapore had been through SARS. Everything was in place and they could just immobilize it, you know. So
yeah, but here's the thing, you know, like since this hit last year, and I'm actually going to ask you a question about when you think the first case arrived here. But you know, the answer to everything was locked down, and I think it's great to say, oh, in other countries they did this and they locked it down and it worked, and because they had SARS, they managed SARS well, so they knew exactly what to get done. Do you know, like, I don't think there is one stage of this we got right. I'm sorry to everyone that's worked hard and, people sacrificed a lot. I can't point to one thing, one decision we made here that we got right. Largely, track and trace has been a disaster, never worked. We saw all the lovely videos, of the army in doing the call centres last March, April. Even locking down, the government had to be dragged into the acting government at the time. Cheltenham went ahead, lads over and back to Cheltenham. I mean, they had to respond to the public outcry to cancel Patrick's Day.
Well, that's a good
point.
Everything,
they had to be pulled into it. You look at even the rollout of the vaccine, right? They had the fridges in and were getting photographs with the fridges.
But Vanessa,
8 weeks before there was anything in there.
This is optics. I mean, that's
no. But my point is, though, point to one thing through the management of this.
Well, that's why
they got right.
That's why Luke is here. I mean, it's like, okay, this is Dunning-Kruger land. What's been happening for the last year?
Yeah.
It appears to me that NPHET, and correct me if I'm wrong, Luke, there wasn't an immunologist or virologist on the NPHET board on the last 2 or 3 months. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah,
that's right. That's absolute insanity. I mean, why not get all the top brains in the country, lads? You're being corralled into Trinity for 3 weeks and eat sandwiches and let's work this out. I mean, we didn't do that as a government.
I'm not here to apologise for the government, Vanessa. Let's start with that. But I would say the following: we didn't overwhelm the hospitals in this country, and the death rate is among the best in Europe. There are two metrics that say we must have got something right, because the hospitals could well have been overwhelmed. They came very close to that, and that would have been a complete disaster because that would have meant a huge amount of death.
Yeah, no, I get the tipping point theory, and to kind of not to bring us to that tipping point, but like for it to
but that was because of the measures they managed to adopt. So I wouldn't agree with you they got everything wrong. I think it was a very difficult situation, very complicated situation, many challenges that had to do with us being in the EU, with the land border with the north. We know around Christmas time, the number of cases in those border counties was disastrous. How are you supposed to solve that one?
Well, we solved foot and mouth. We were in the EU then as well. That's only a few years ago.
That's because there was North-South agreement on that. Don't. Let's not get into North versus South. That will be a big trouble. It's well beyond my pay grade to talk about these things.
On that, Luke, if we could just change, if we can move away from vaccines, there are two areas I do want to ask about. One that I've been thinking about for quite some time, and I did hear you interviewed last year about it, but the science may have changed since then, and that's the topic of kids. Because kids start to go back to school, cases have gone up, naturally you would, to the layperson, you'd say there's a link. In an interview last year, and I can't tell you exactly when it was, Luke, so this may be very old data, but I know you referenced 3 studies, and you talked about a theory, or perhaps a science, on why kids aren't as, what's the word, susceptible to young kids, I should say, aren't susceptible. Yeah. Could you maybe just explain what that is, and then I'll hit you with the theory I have about now. But if that is, guys, can you just explain a little bit why the scientists don't believe that kids are a big risk?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess I might start it, Neil, by saying it's essential the schools reopen because the harm being done far outweighed the risk. It's always about balancing risk versus one thing versus another. Risk benefit is what this is all about. Everything we do will come with a risk. And those schools being closed, we know from Ebola outbreaks in Africa. I'll give you one little statistic there. So Ebola, as you know, is a devastating disease. They shut down schools in Africa for, say, 3, 4, 5 months. They were measuring harm to those children 10 years later of being kept out of education for those 3 or 4 months. So the priority had to be to get the schools open. Now, the question then becomes, well, look, is there a risk of that then doing harm on the other side by spreading infection? Of course, there's going to be a low level of spread because people are, picking up the schools. The schools do their best by having ventilation, distancing, hand washing, endless griping about that and bubbles and all the rest of it. But I think the schools have done a good job to contain this. It could have been much worse than it has been. And there have been a few outbreaks in schools. The reason for the current plateauing, you can't link that to schools directly. It may be a factor in it, but it certainly wouldn't justify locking down the schools again because the harm you do to those children is huge, you see. So that's the way to think of schools, I think. Now, That's my opinion. Okay. Now, not just mine. Other people say this. Now, the biology of this is very simple. Children are not at risk of severe disease. They do very, very well. With a very rare exception for tragedies. I'm not trying to downplay the importance of children getting very sick, as some do tragically, you know. But the vast majority do not get very sick, and they handle the virus very well. And I bet they build up a bit of immunity, which is going to be good for them in the long run anyway, you know. So we don't worry about them getting infected. That's not a concern that we have. The concern is they bring the virus back home and infect their grandparents or whatever it is. Hence, we have the need for the current measures to, you know, allow the mask wearing and the distancing in the home and all that kind of thing, you know, try and limit that. And that's the best you can do with this, really. Of course, if a child gets infected, they will carry less virus in their nose because they're smaller. I'm honest to God, it's as simple as that. There's less tissue for the virus to grow in. The fact that they're smaller in height means the aerosols go in a different direction. That decreases the risk of being infected from a child. So there's lots of studies on this showing that if you compare a child to an adult, a child is less likely to spread this virus than an adult for these reasons. The last reason is their immune response is so strong against this virus. They eliminate the thing within an hour of it being in their noses, you know? Their immune system makes these things called type 1 interferons, and kids are very good at making those, much better than adults are. So they're almost designed to fight viruses, probably from evolutionary reasons, you know? So there's some of the reasons why we think that, now there is a risk, I'm not denying it. But the risk is not sufficient to cause huge harm by closing schools.
So if somebody says then that kids are spreaders or super spreaders, then is that just a myth then?
That's a myth. They're not super spreaders for definite, by the way. Most adults don't spread this virus, remember. 10% of people spread it to 80% of others. 90% are not really spreading it at all, you know? Now, what is a super spreader? And this is well known, the science is superb on this, well documented. A super spreader is usually someone who will have picked up the virus, will have not too many symptoms, strangely. And for some reason, it grows like crazy in that person's nose. And now they're spewing out virus to everybody, you know, and they meet 10 people and infect 8 of them, this kind of thing, you know. Someone else is not a super spreader. They might be infected, they might be positive for the virus. They have a lot less virus in their nose and they're not spreading it as much. The other traits of the super spreader are, and people accuse me of this, if you talk loudly, you're releasing probably 12 times as much virus. Just by simply speaking loudly at someone else, a lot more virus comes out of your mouth. So loud mouths, if I can put it that way, they're more likely to be super spreaders, for instance, you know. And then there's about 4 or 5 other factors that govern someone actually becoming a super spreader. And it can be as simple as shouting, because the virus comes out in these fantastic aerosols if you shout or sing. And you may have heard this statistic. When you sing, you release 99 times the amount of virus than when you speak. Okay.
I've seen that, yeah.
Now imagine that for a minute. That's been measured now scientifically. That's why we have.
Are you trying to tell me something there? Because the lads are giving out about me singing.
We didn't want to mention your name, Vanessa.
And you're a super spreader, Vanessa. I reckon you're a super spreader to me.
Just
toxic.
Kind of that's quite helpful, because it does kind of knocks on the head the next question I was going to ask. But the other thing I wanted to ask you about was, which you've kind of touched on there, is contact tracing. But firstly, community transmission. Is there an accepted definition of what, because we hear that a lot, you know, and particularly when the Minister for Education was asked about schools and transmission, and then there's that kind of black hole of, well, that's community transmission. And what is there a scientific accepted definition of what community transmission is? Does that differ from, say, how the government or the NFIT use it, or are we talking about the same thing? So maybe that's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question, as part of it, is the contact tracing. What should an ideal contact tracing function look like in a country?
Well, we know already that once the virus gets to a certain level, contact tracing is a waste of time because it's too difficult to do, right? And the reason why South Korea and Singapore and several countries got a hold of it, they got in early, you know? So in other words, if there's loads of community transmission, back to that in a minute, you can't trace all the contacts, too many contacts to trace, you know? It's too difficult to do. So contact tracing only works if it's low level virus in the community is the first thing, right? Because otherwise it's very hard to do because it's spreading too fast and there's too many people to test. Now, what community transmission is, it's very simple. You don't know where someone's catching it from. That's what community transmission is. It's as simple as that. And they call it community. It's in the community. It means nearly everybody has it, but there's loads of people have it, and you can't figure out who you caught it off. Like, let's say us 5 are in a room together and I might have caught it off any one of you. I can't tell who it is because we're all affected, you know? So that's what community transmission is. It means you cannot trace the source of the infection to explain you caught it off that person there, right? If it's not community transmission, it means you caught it off your neighbor or you caught it off the butcher when you went in there. You can tell exactly where you got it from. And that means you can control it because you can test the butcher and all his contacts, you know? And that's why contact tracing fails when there's community transmission, because you can't track everybody who's infected and you can't trace it to people, you see. And it's as simple as that in many ways. You know? So in other words, once the fire starts to burn, it's very hard to put out using contact tracing and testing.
Yeah, but then why was so much money and resources spent on it? And like, not so let's just, I'll park what was going on here because they are me. But I mean, it's from what I can see in the UK, they privatized it, and like it's nearly up to 30 billion they have spent on contact tracing. So like, if it wasn't, you know, going to contribute to managing the pandemic, why would you spend that kind of money? That doesn't make sense to me. That's
a great question, Vanessa. It sounds like money wasted to me in that case. I'll tell you that one. I guess it's partly because it can work if you control a region, say Kerry or Donegal, and you can try and track it and trace it and isolate people, then it might work in that context, you know. But once
do you know who said that? Do you know who said? Sorry for interrupting. Now you're probably not used to people interrupting you, but
I am the whole time. People don't be shouting at me. You're an anti-vaxxer prick, for example. You know, I get that.
Oh, right, yeah.
Well used to it. Go on with it.
But come here. Do you know who said that actually? And he said it early summer, where it was Michael Healy-Rae. He said, why can't we manage, you know, sort of the Kerry situation here?
You move towards that. There's people pressing for regional control, and that makes sense as well.
It makes absolute sense. But why is it only making sense now, this length of time into it? Because hotel quarantining started this week.
Indeed, it did. That's right.
15 months after. Well, now this is where I'm going to put you on the spot here. And if you want to start singing a song, that's fine instead. But like that's over 13 months from when this case landed. The GP
great,
with
that's nothing to do with me, thank God.
No, that's okay. No, I know. Listen, they should have left it to me. I'd have had to finish. Listen, I would have killed that virus with my own hands last year, and I would have said,
you need to stand for election. That's what I recommend.
Oh, do you know what? Now that you mention it, you say vote for Vanessa. Do you know what? Sorry, I'm going to put you on the spot here, and if you want to sing a song instead rather than answer, when do you think the virus arrived here? When do you think it actually may have been here? Well, because I believe it was earlier than February. I'll be honest.
We don't know. I'd start with that because it could have been earlier. We may well find evidence it was earlier. What we know for definite was the first case was February 29th that we can measure, and we have a record of that, you know. But it wouldn't surprise me if it was here before Christmas, Vanessa. And in fact, there's more evidence now in the UK based on what's called seroprevalence, is the fancy word for this, that it must have been around before December 2019, you know. So it could well have been. You see, the problem was, how do you know it's a virus that's causing this disease? Even in Wuhan, it took them about 3 weeks to figure out this was a brand new virus, because it looks a bit like the flu, remember. Some of the symptoms are very similar. So if you're a doctor in a hospital, let's say in November in Ireland, someone turns up and you're in the GP feeling a bit rough and he can't breathe and he's coughing and spluttering and he gets worse and he goes to the hospital. They would assume that's a severe flu. They're not going to take a sample and measure the virus in them, are they? Because the virus has been discovered, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I get that. You mentioned Wuhan. Do you believe all the information they were giving? Do you think they held stuff back? Do you think they were upfront from day one? Or do you think they had to be pulled into?
I hope you tuned into my primetime episode, because we had a woman in Wuhan who was commissioned by RT to dig into it and try to find out. And it came back very unsatisfactory. And the stuff we don't know there, basically, right? And of course, the Chinese are saying, well, look, it came from America, is one statement they're making lately, you know. We still do not know where that virus came from. And that's a bit of a disgrace because it's a year on, you know. The WHO went in with a very competent group of people. Wait to hear this. They sent in 9 experts, right? One of the experts had tracked MERS to camels, for instance. He was an expert on tracking viruses into animals, you know. They had a woman there who was an expert on wet market spreading viruses. These people have years of experience. They came back with no report. They haven't issued a report yet. So now why is that? We're all smelling a rat, if I can put it that way, you know. So it's a mystery, isn't it? I mean,
that lab is a bit it's sort of like you know, the movie with Brad Pitt. I always have to mention Brad Pitt.
No, I think if you look at it as rationally as we can and take politics out of it and all that kind of thing, it more than likely came from a bat that was in the wild, and it might have been in the countryside outside Wuhan. It could have been Laos or Vietnam. There's loads of bats all over the place in those countries, you know. And it jumped into a human, and then that human then began to spread it.
Matt Damon was in that movie.
He was, yeah. I don't believe it. Okay, there's an extreme chance it was an accident in a lab in Wuhan that somebody dropped a test tube. Okay, that's very unlikely because it's quite hard to catch it that way, and they are extremely careful because they don't get sick themselves, do they?
So you're deflating that idea that it's
I think it's unlikely. There's still a chance, Jimmy. There's still
but it's interesting because I have a Chinese friend, Yue, and he's a cellist, and he went when we first started getting inklings of this mid to late January last year. Before he was right to finger, and the family are still in China. He flew back to China, and he came back at the end of January before anything got broken.
Yeah,
he said there's something going on, and the government are lying through their teeth.
Yeah.
And they're well used to that there, you know.
They are, and the trouble is they've got a bad track record, Jimmy, with SARS, for instance. They delayed that.
That's
and
right.
Remember, they fired people trying to release information. That's
absolutely, yeah.
It would make you slightly uneasy, and I think fair play to the Chinese scientists, because I've been to China a few times as an immunologist at conferences, and they've got very good scientists there actually. And one of them leaked the virus, the sequence of the virus, out into Australia, and then it went to Edinburgh, and then they could start making a vaccine. If they had delayed that, they'd be months behind on the vaccine thing. So that scientist deserves our praise, because he defied the instruction not to release information, you know.
And then just before we move on to matters of more levity, where do you stand on vitamins D, vitamin C, zinc, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine?
Yep.
Any of all of those? Where do you stand on that? I'm waiting for a vaccine. I'll be waiting, it appears.
Yeah.
At the moment, I'm taking DA and zinc every day. So,
well, you see, you've got to use the gold standard evidence for these things, which is the double-blind placebo-controlled trial, tried and tested through history. Many trials have been done with many medicines over the years. They seem to suggest something, and then in the real world, they don't mean anything. And that's why they began to do double-blind placebo-controlled trials, just to sort this out. This goes back 50 years, you know. Now, of all of those things, there is actually no evidence for any of those that you listed, first of all, in a double-blind placebo-controlled trial, and that makes me uneasy. There's anecdotal evidence there may be something in ivermectin. There's been 1 or 2 studies. It seems to be antiviral, but I'm looking for the gold standard trial with those. Now, what I would say with vitamins is you need good nutrition to have a healthy immune system. That's been known for decades. And vitamin D actually has 2 jobs in your body. It was originally discovered as a bone vitamin. That was its first function, because I'm a biochemist originally and I know a lot about vitamins. So rickets was caused by vitamin D deficiency. They tracked that to this thing which they named vitamin D. So it's needed for strong bones. And then beginning about 35 years ago, immunologists said, oh, you need it for your immune system. And nobody believed them. Like, how can something for your bones be required for your immune system? The data got stronger and stronger and stronger. You need vitamin D to make your immune system work properly, right? Now, what that means then is if you're deficient, you should take a supplement to make sure your immune system is going to do its job, you know? And then there's all these correlation studies now. Now, again, correlation is okay, but we much prefer causation, but still, low vitamin D, much more severe disease, you know? And that's been repeated now across multiple studies. So that's true, that observation. Now, what's probably not true is if you're really sick, that vitamin D will cure you. That's the horse is bolted, you know?
No, but the point is it's preventative at the moment. Maybe
it's preventative, yeah. And so is vitamin C and zinc.
Zinc, yeah.
Again, your immune system needs zinc. And we know exactly why. We know the bits of the immune system that suck up the zinc and make it work properly. And the other one's iron is extremely important. We've known for quite a while iron is essential for the immune system. And there was a great study which you may have heard me talking about with Pat Kenny. There was a great study about a month ago. If you're iron deficient, vaccines for mumps and rubella don't work in your body. Okay.
Ah, wow.
So make sure your iron is up before you get your vaccine, because there's a chance of that vaccine, because again, iron is needed for certain parts of the immune system for vaccine efficacy, you see. So this is all good. And then the other thing to say is, Jimmy, a good balanced diet will get you most of this. The one exception is vitamin D, because we're all deficient in the winter, especially if you're over 50, because your skin can't make it. So that makes sense to take a supplement. Other things like iron and in fact vitamin C and zinc, you should get that of a normal balanced diet.
Okay, and finally, how miserable has your life been made by conspiracy theorists?
Well, you just suck it up. You got to get used to it. If someone said to me, if you play rugby, you're going to get hit. You know, so that's the best way to put it.
In fairness, yeah.
Well, I mean, what gets me about it is, most of all, I don't mind conspiracy people. There's people who still think the earth is flat, you know, and that man didn't walk on the moon. That was the back of a Hollywood set. That's fine if they want to believe that. I go with the science, you know, and I try to explain the science. I don't bother explaining science to conspiracy theorists because as soon as they're already against me, we're opening my mouth. So there's no point. It's the middle ground I worry about, that they might get swayed by this, and that will harm them if they decide not to take a vaccine, or if they decide to behave in a certain way. They could be harmed by this conspiracy stuff, you see. So they're the ones I try to reassure, and I just give the science. They can pass on the science if they don't want to take it on board. That's their decision, kind of thing, you know. And what struck me as a surprise was the level of nastiness that came at me, because I hope I'm not that weird a guy that deserves such a vicious nastiness.
Oh, but you probably, as a scientist, you probably wouldn't be aware of this, but you've grabbed the brass ring, inadvertently, as it were, and as soon as you are on the telly 4 times a day or whatever, this is the flip side. This is what happens.
There were different types of attacking me, Jimmy. One was the anti-vaxxers. They would come at me a lot, right? And I would mainly ignore them. The anti-maskers were very active, you know. And then what I call general nastiness. O'Neill, you're so fucking full of yourself, playing your guitar and smiling. I actually frame those and put them on my wall because they're so.
That's just old-fashioned begrudgery. We like that. That's part of the Irish psyche.
It is the Irish psyche, though. Yeah, they need to remind you. You know,
more seriously, my wife had 4 messages left on her work phone saying, "We're going to kill your husband." You know.
Oh, really? Really?
And I was assaulted twice, once on Grafton Street and once on the Dart. Now, when I say assault, one guy pulled me by the collar, you know. Now, you just shrug it off, Jimmy. There's not much you can do about it, you know. The best part of that story was I was on the Dart one day and I'm just working. It was early in the morning and I'm reading some science stuff. And a guy sits opposite me, started roaring at me, shouting at me, you know. And I said, "Very sorry, I'm trying to do a bit of work here." "Oh, no, you're going to listen to me now." So I got off the Dart, I went into the next carriage. He came after me, this guy, right? And again, he's sitting opposite me. Little old lady, I'd say she was in her late 70s, came over and I went up to him and she was like 4'9". "Leave Luke alone." And he backed off. So I said, "Would you be my bodyguard?" That's fantastic.
The Dublin mammy is not to be messed with, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, leave it in. Was it that easy?
Luke, we want to end on a high, and so bearing in mind things can change. So if we're on track with the vaccines, the way things are going, I know you've spoken about outdoor drinking and dining might be a thing for the summer. Yeah. When are we going to be having this conversation inside in Kills? When you finish in Trinity someday, we went for a pint in Kills. When do you think that's going to happen?
Neil, you're tormenting me now with that vista. I just desperately. I mean, I can't believe it. Can you? I mean, my local pub is Fitzy's in Sandy Cove. I walk by there and my head hangs down. It hasn't opened in a year. I look in the window. There's dust. It's awful. It's a hard one. I think let's start with this. We'll know we're back to some kind of regular existence that we want when 2 or 3 things happen. Okay. One is music festivals, and God bless you, Jimmy, you'd agree with that. So then we'll know if we can gather in numbers in a field, listen to a band.
No, just let me stop you. New Zealand, they're doing that. They've done
absolutely.
So clearly, whatever they've done, which is in the adherence policy and immunity and vaccinations, the whole deal, it is possible for 10,000 people to be all on top of each other, spitting all. So that will happen again.
That will happen. No, I'm telling you, this is the future. We will get to that point. But then we'll know.
Because I've made my own kind of dystopian predictions. Now, nothing to do with anti-science. It's human behavior. It's already after a year of lockdown. The idea for me of plugging into a Marshall stack and standing in front of 5,000 people or 500 people is the weirdest thing in the world. It's become very weird, an alien idea, and I don't know if it'll ever happen again because music is everything is changing as it does. You know?
No, I think Jimmy, there's good stuff on this coming out that I've read as well. So even if we opened up, there's going to be reluctance because we're all beaten up, you know, and there'll be people. I'm not going to that, and I'm just my advice there is feel like you felt the day before you went back to school in September. You didn't really want to go, did you? You know, but then once you were in there, you were great. You got used to it. That kind of level of reluctance is going to be evident, I think. But getting back to the next few months, I suppose we're all wondering. I can't overemphasize enough. If we get the death rate right down, if we get the cases in hospitals right down, if this becomes like a regular disease, which it is good, that the vaccine will do that, and we're learning that, as I said several times, then the government have to say, right, we can't maintain the things we're maintaining. It's unfair. There's no reason to maintain these things. And then they begin to open up. Now it'll be stepwise because we're all beaten up. You know, we'll be cautious. You'll start with outdoor drinks in a beer garden. I'm still confident that's going to happen. You know, outdoor activities are very safe because we know, as you probably know, the number. I've been saying it all the time. There's a 19-fold decrease risk just by going outdoors. You know, so these are safe enough things to do. Now, when do we end up in a pub together? That may need the vaccine certificate, Neil. Watch because of the anxiety, largely, right? And didn't Boris Johnson yesterday say, Jimmy,
Yeah,
no jab, no point?
That's right. Yeah.
So we met. Now there's issues about that. There's issues about excluding people who mightn't be able to get a vaccine. All kinds of problems there. But still, I can see that coming in, Neil. And I do think the EU is going to bring it in anyway. Vaccine certificates. The only issue is forgery, interestingly, but they'll sort that one out. So I can see you and me going into kiosks if we're both been vaccinated, and we show our little iPhone up to the guy in the door, and then we're let in, and then you behave normally. Remember, the CDC 2 weeks ago have now issued the guidelines to Americans as to what they can do post-vaccination. And they've said it's absolutely permissible for 2 vaccinated people to meet indoors and behave as if it's the good old days. No need for distancing, no need for masks or nothing, you know. So,
okay, can I take you out of the science world then, Luke? And you know, you're in your day job, clearly. I can see that. So you're spending, you know, you're the celebrity professor now as well as a working man and whatever. But what's going on outside of science here, economically, mental health wise, all that stuff? I'm sure you've got some awareness of it, obviously, but how do you see that playing? I mean, you know, kiosks, for instance, probably won't open up again. I'm sure they're broke after a year of being, you know.
Well, I'd be printing more money, Jimmy.
Well, they're good. We had Eddie Hobbs on a couple of weeks ago, and Eddie was saying that.
I'd print billions, and
they're doing it already. They're printing the quantitative easing.
Yeah, but that's not the answer. That's not the answer. So, you know, like I think we need to be careful about being. Oh, I can't wait for kiosks to open, and I can't wait for this to open. You know, like you see the true cost of it.
You're a real glass half empty person there.
No,
we're just beginning to enjoy imagining kiosks.
Yeah, but you see,
we can't be thinking about that now.
Yeah, but
how are you surviving?
You know what now? I'm going to put you in your place here now, right?
Because no, that's what Vanessa does.
No. But you're just to be two-faced about this, guys. Because we've had this discussion here again and again and again, right? That for a huge portion, for a significant portion of the population, lockdown and the had no impact on their lives other than the sort of the physicality of having to, you know, their holidays were cancelled, or, you know, they had to queue before they go into the shopping centre, or they had to wash their hands, had to wear masks, and had to stay local, and, you know, ended up having the kids around the house all day and the homeschooling and all that. For a large portion of the population, that was the only impact. You know, they were still getting paid. Some people, you know, sold their companies and made millions and all the rest of it. And, you know, so our government got pay rises through this whole thing. Four pay rises. And, you know, exactly. A huge sector of our country have been wiped out. They will never recover. Never.
So the question is, how do we help those people now?
But you see, well, yes, that's one. The other thing is that everyone that was involved in the decision making, and we were using NEFIT there earlier, they at no stage were they in a position to recognize what the impact of their decisions.
Can I ask you a question, Vanessa? Should they have all taken a vow of poverty then before they joined NEFIT?
No, I wouldn't. No, that's not the point. No, that's
no. It's about cognizance.
And I think that's a bit unfair now, to be honest with you, because, like, even on the NEFIT committee, I think there should have been more representation of sort of the wider community.
I agree with that 100%. There's no
small to medium by. Well,
there's no scientists on NEFIT. As Jimmy pointed, there's no immunologists on NEFIT either, which is outrageous, you know?
It's crazy.
So I agree with you entirely. There should have been a mix of interest groups on NEFIT to advise that, remember. Now, their remit is public health, though, remember. They are the National Public Health Emergency, you know, whatever.
And they're experts, and I'm not saying they should have taken a vow of poverty, and I think that was cheap. But
I thought you were saying they were all comfortable and they were making decisions.
No. It's apartheid.
There's an apartheid here because we actually don't know the full cost of the lockdown of it going on, and I really like we kind of walked around this at the start and about the airport and now the quarantining 13 months. Really. If those decisions were made last March, last April, even May, you know, people's day today would have been very different. an awful lot of people. And I don't think that's represented enough. I really don't think our current government are seeing that. I think they're not. I use the expression they're not amongst us.
No.
And I'm seeing that, and I don't think we will really know the impact of that for another 2, 3, even 4 years. And I work with personal debt, right? That's my specialty here. And like most of the debt I bankrupted last year or in the last 2 years, I probably bankrupted over 200 million in the last 3 years, say. And I can tell you most of that debt was 10, 15 years old.
Right.
So it's going to be years before this real cost.
Can I ask you a question? Do you rate any of them?
Where's any of who? The government?
The people in either government or nothing? Or are they all a shower of shysters?
I know. I think...
be fair, no, I mean, no, I don't rate. I don't particularly. I think, you know, again, I would be very pragmatic in my approach to something like this, an existential crisis. And it's like, and I mentioned the Dunning-Krugers, and I think our government have been very, they were so caught up in forming a half-baked coalition last February after the disastrous general election. But I don't want to get into politics particularly, because they've all been equally inept worldwide. Instead of just stopping and saying, lads, this is an enormous deal. This is the first time since 1918, the Spanish flu, that we've had something as big as this. Let's stop and let's get the either follow. It really bugged me that Leo and Simon Harris were talking about following the science and clearly not following the science.
Listen, I'm on the same page for obvious reasons, you know. I think
you could look at but here's a great example of the complete disconnect and of the failure to either to sort of even recognize how, even the self-awareness, what they looked like from all of us looking in, right? You look the head of the HSE, and I don't want to get personal about this, but that was a shambles from long ways off, between the poor tendering and they never seemed to be a grip on any aspect of how you manage the pandemic at all.
Yeah, well, you see, the reason I became a scientist was to avoid politics.
Why were you going to go into politics?
Never.
That's not the only thing you haven't done yet.
Never. And I also say, Vanessa, that term celebrity scientist, that's an oxymoron for me, celebrity scientist. They're actually, you know, they kind of are the opposite of what it should be, you know. Because the one thing you don't want to be if you're a scientist is a celebrity, because it's the absolute polar opposite of what science is all about, you see. So the fact that I've been thrown into that is intriguing to me.
On that, Luke, does it worry you in any way that you're
not at all. Jimmy, I'm spending about 90% of my time with my lab doing research. We have 5 projects running on COVID. I've got good research funding. And as you referred to, Vanessa, I'm trying to find cures for Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease here, remember as well. That's my day. I could step away from this and it wouldn't affect me in any way at all. You know, I'm only doing it because people ask me and because it's important to get the information out there. I am a public servant of sorts. I know a lot of stuff about this virus and I know a lot of immunology. Why shouldn't I be sharing it with as many people as I can? And there's a massive appetite for this stuff, because I've never seen that. I mean, one of the big things that I find, I've been on Pat Kenny since 2012, you know, right? So somebody texted in recently, it'd be great if Luke was on more often than just in the last few months. I've been on since 2012, you know.
Welcome to showbiz,
actually, look at this, look.
Oh, God bless you, Vanessa.
Well, no, it's not. It's belonged to the teenager. She told me she had the book when I said you were coming on the show this evening.
There you go.
So, and I'm flicking through it there.
I hope you have a read of it. It might help you fall asleep.
Well, I'm just looking at you're very miserable with your signature.
Yeah, that was actually a Euro sign. No,
I'm conscious of the time, Vanessa, and you've got your boyfriend behind you in the background there.
Right.
But before you say that, thanks, Luke. Big thanks for joining us tonight and sharing the insight. Really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And there's a million and one more questions we'd like to ask and pick your brain on. But appreciate
maybe in Kyo's sometime we'll have
maybe in Kyo's for the live show after Jimmy plays special. But to take us home, Vanessa, because I have my bed to go to at some point tonight.
To get home.
I thought you had a chauffeur or something there. Do you not have rooms? Shouldn't she not give you your own apartment?
Is that tax deductible?
with a chauffeur. Yeah, it would be. Should be an employee.
No, I don't have a chauffeur. Are you joking me? Although, mind you, I don't drive, interestingly. I can't drive, right?
Really?
I never learned, yeah. And I said that in an interview with the dreaded media. 3 guys said, I'll be your driver and I've got a chauffeur business. They read it in the Independent and they offered their services. So you never know, I might take them up on
it. So, Vanessa, go on. Tell us about your boyfriend behind you there.
His boyfriend. I thought you'd know all about him drooling over Mr. Star Trek.
William
Shatner.
He turned 90 years young. 90 years young.
That was his Zoom interview yesterday. And he's still working full time. He's a movie coming out and a senile moment, I think, and with Jean Smart, who's a fabulous actor. We never see enough of her. But he had a very interesting story about he was supposed to go, he was in London when lockdown was announced. He was to go, just about to go on stage in the Apollo, and he had a full house, 3,600 people. And it just got cancelled, and all his gigs around the world just got cancelled overnight. And he was at 89, so like he was 89 at that point. So suddenly everything had stopped, but he's still working full time. And over the year he did an album as well.
I have the album.
90 years of age.
Yeah, it's absolutely essential listening the album. And in fact, there's a video of one of them on YouTube of him doing the David Gates song and he talks through it. It is fucking awful. It is just kitsch multiplied by.
But you remember on the Top the Pops in the 70s, and he was doing the sort of the show band Gatch of the 70s, the
Gatch.
But they'd have the sort of the male model, the leg up on the stool and stuff like that.
That was it. The cigarette going around. It was fantastic. Just he's the most overacting actor.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to break up this fascinating conversation, but I've got to get the dart. Otherwise, I'll be in trouble.
Will you come on again? You have to do canvas for me. Good. You're not going to do that.
Leslie, you're not going to get your honorary doctorate that way. We're going to wrap it up there.
But I will say this, Neil: live long and prosper.
Nanu.
No.
Just going to thank Luke again for joining us tonight and taking time out, particularly from the office. It gives a nice backdrop for us. Thanks again, Luke. Our Duchess of Dublin 12 went looking for honorary doctorate, didn't get one.
I was looking for a Trinity degrees.
Vanessa, thanks, Vanessa. And Jimmy, you made it after all. 2-time Grammy and Award nominated. Luke's a fan. There you go. Yeah, Jimmy Smyth, thank you, Jimmy.
Great. I'll boast about that now to me, mate.
Too kind.
Thanks to you who have joined in to watch us live or watching us on playback, and for giving your comments. We'll be back on the site. We'll be back next week and back on the site tomorrow. So thank you for tuning in.